the airport. But anyway, something I do want to say too. Now you can record now, if you like, please. You right? Joe Biden, the man seeking vice presidency, has come under a lot of attacks for his pseudo-Catholic situation, telling the bishops they don't know what Catholic teaching is, and telling them, quoting St. Thomas Aquinas. That's what I want to focus on just for a minute. Quoting St. Thomas, that he was for abortion. I've heard that a number of times.
That was Pelosi.
Pelosi did, yes, but
Pelosi,
Biden, yes, Biden's been saying it now too. No, he's been saying it. He says, this is what they're doing, what they're quoting. St. Thomas, in 2 or 3 places that I can remember, he says this, and he's quoting the biologists of his time, that in the gestation of a child, a human child, it goes through 3 stages. First, it has a vegetative life, plant life. Then it has animal life, and then it becomes human. I've seen anatomical evidence of that sort of thing, where they show that the child in the womb looks like an animal with its tail, etc., etc. Now that was following the biology of his time. Nobody accepts that today. And St. Thomas borrowed that from the biologists. And it's plain wrong. Now, something Biden doesn't know is what St. Thomas says in his doctoral thesis, the commentary on the Book of Sentences. The word sentence really means, sententia means opinions. There's a famous theologian who wrote the book on sentences, the opinions, theological opinions. And the big thing in the Middle Ages was for a philosopher, or a theologian rather, to comment on this. And there are many of them available. St. Thomas is the one that's most commonly used today. And in that book, he says, although the child in the womb may not be human, nevertheless, abortion is a very great evil. Why? Why did he say that? Because he doesn't use the silly principles which are being used everywhere in the world today. He used the proper principle, the fundamental principle. Now, a certain bishop in the United States published this, that if the child is in the womb is not human, we may very well kill it. Yeah. Catholics United for the Faith got in touch with me and asked me to respond to that, and I did. I said to the bishop, when I'm teaching this subject, I do not use the humanity of the fetus. Whether the fetus is human or not, it's immoral to kill the child, because you've exercised a power and rejected the end of that power. And in ethics, as we show, the end is principle in practical matters. What the end is for. This is not used by the pro-life movement. Never. They never use it. Every operation is for the sake of an end. And what is the end? In this case, of genital activity, for the sake of new live man, reproduction of the species. And we're going to deal with that when we come to plant vegetation. And in his doctoral thesis, and I have the copies of the specific section, Book 3, Distinction 31, at the beginning, St. Thomas says, although the child in the womb may not be human at some stage, nevertheless, it's a very great evil. Woodbury describes it as virtual murder. Now, virtual has a very specific meaning in philosophy. It doesn't mean almost the way the popular press uses it. It means having the power of. It's got the power of destroying a human person, even if it was not human. But nobody accepts today that it's not human. Nobody accepts that. So Biden and Nancy Pelosi are wrong. And, they're flaunting their Catholicism in front of everybody and misquoting it. And they are misinformed. And as St. Thomas says, the uninformed person who shoots his mouth off is a damn dangerous person. Anyway, I'm not speaking politically, I'm speaking ethically here as an ethician. Somebody who teaches the science of ethics. So they're absolutely wrong.
Can we send them some discs?
Pardon?
Can we send them some discs?
Some business?
Yes.
Oh, discs.
Pelosi and Biden.
I doubt they'd read it. They'd listen to it. I'd say they're too proud. Now, we're talking about the signs of this mode of operation, that is to say, imminent activity. Irritability. And as who was telling me just about the Moscow, just a minute ago? Who was it again? Oh yes, that's right. Our friend here said about the Russians did some experiments on this. And they found that plants, when you have two plants lying on a table here, and you strip a branch off one, this one reacts. They had it tied up to electrodes, and this one reacted, gave off electrical impulse, or at least it was registered as an electrical impulse. Then they locked this plant in another room, and they did the action again. And it's still this one reacted. Well, I know this much. Stuff that I have had to read in the past, way back. They took plants and put electrodes on the plants, and they took a mouse and killed it. And the electrical impulse given off by the plant was quite enormous amongst all these plants, a big electrical impulse when they killed the mouse. How can we explain this? We cannot. All we can say is there is a reaction. But how it's carried is very difficult to determine. Maybe someday we'll know, but that's... Now, we call it, it's not, I wouldn't call it a communication, though they did. I'd call it a reaction of irritability. It's something in there. The same as when cows can't understand music because music depends on intellect. It's a relationship of sound to sound. But what cows do, react by some kind of irritability somehow. Probably the tissues are all relaxed or something by the music, but they cannot understand music. It takes intellect. We'll come to that later. So there's the first sign of imminent activity, operations of irritability. The second sign is internal finality. Now, internal finality means the end for which the being operates is within the being. For instance, when I decided to walk and pick up the cup of coffee, my intellect made a judgment, my will ordered the imagination to order the executive powers, and they then stimulated the nerves and the muscles and the legs got going. All of that operated as a reaction for me. The end for which it all operated was for me. And this is what happens when cows see grass and go over to graze, and a camel sees another camel and goes over to talk to the other, or to be with the other camel, hardly talk. The human power of nutrition, for instance, operates for the sake, and in all other animals, operates for the brain. The power of nutrition operates for the brain. The brain operates for the intellect. The intellect's operating for me. That's internal finality. Finality means the end. Finis, finish. Finis in Latin means the end. The purpose, if you like to put it that way. The purpose, all those things are done or are for the living itself. Thirdly, nutrition. We saw that. Nutrition, which takes place in the cell. That's where nutrition takes place. The horse plus hay gives more horse. Replacement, repair, etc. And energy. So those three signs, irritability, internal finality, and nutrition, they're the signs of vital activity, living activity. Excuse me. Now, there's a little summary chart I'm going to put on the board, which just summarises things here neatly. I like these charts. I've made many of them for students. As Woodbury used to say, one picture's worth 1,000 words. But the distinction between living and non-living is infinite. Don't think of infinite as stretched out space. A lot of people have a wrong notion of infinity. One of the best minds I saw in this was Father Pierre Conway, a Dominican father down with the House of Studies there. Did some brilliant stuff in scientific work. He gave me a couple of these books. The living versus the non-living. This is what we've done. Living over non-living equals imminent action over transitive action. Over transitive action equals ectropic, ectropic action over entropic action. Entropic over entropic action. Equals auto-perfection over hetero-perfection. That's summarised. You can fill this out to your own purposes, your own methods. You can fill it out into charts if you wanted to. Now we come to little d.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Could you explain hetero?
Hetero means other.
I know. How does that?
Oh, where are we? Oh, non-living things perfect other things. Hot coffee perfects the spoon by causing it to be hot. We'll have a little more to say about that later. I won't try and do that tonight. In fact, I don't think it's in the notes. We'll be coming to that, I think, next class, possibly. What happens when hot coffee heats the spoon? Does the heat leap out of the coffee into the spoon? What happens? Have you ever seen heat walking around? No. You ever seen a walking around? No. I've seen a dream walking around. I've seen a few of them. But what happens when the heat moves over? Transfer, but what's that mean? Does the heat jump out? Heat can only exist in something. We'll talk about that presently. But now, what I want to know is, you've seen plants, you've eaten vegetables, they're organised, they've got organs. Plants have leaves, stem and roots. It's got the xylem and the phloem in the stem. It's got all the hair cells coming out of the roots. It's got this and that. They've all got, then it's got flowers rather, coming out of it, bears fruit. All of that, it's organic. But do you see arms and legs in water? Or a rock of gold? Does it have organs? Why do living things have organs and non-living things do not have organs? A cup of coffee hasn't got any organs. A rock hasn't got any organs. In fact, if you've got, say, sandstone rock, you've got sand in one part just as much as you have in another part. It's not specialised tissues, which we call organs. And by the way, when the anatomist speaks about organs, he speaks about a macroscopic, a big function being performed. When the philosopher talks about an organ, he uses the organ of every part. For instance, the cell wall is an organ. Whatever performs a specific function, the philosopher calls an organ. Organ has another word comes from Latin. Organon is Greek. Instrumentum is Latin. Organ is an instrument. So why are plants organic? Even the little Hematococcus, it's one cell, so minute you can only see it with a powerful microscope. It belongs to what we call the flagella. These are little ciliates, little whips, little feelers that push the plant around, swims around. There's another one, Volvox, which has a whole lot of cells. It has all these little feelers going out from it. These are all organic. This is so highly specialised that they could write volumes on it. The cell wall, the ovum comes from into the woman's womb. That's one cell. and it's highly organised. The male sperm, that's one cell, and it's highly organised. Like these things, it has little ciliates to push it around, swim around. Now, they're highly specialised organs. Why do living things have organs and why do non-living things not have organs? It's to conform with a certain principle of reason. And this, I'll put the principle on the board. Well, I think I have done it before. Whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. Nothing can move itself by perfect self-movement. Everything has to be moved by another. Now, it's going to take a lot of explaining. So, if everything requires to be moved, then our locomotive power, our power of moving parts, moving from place to place, etc., requires to be moved. The will moves the intellect, and the intellect moves the will in two different orders of movement. They cause each other. They move the imagination, which moves the passion, which moves the nervous, or the executive power, the locomotive power, which moves the nerves and which moves the muscles. All of this is taking place within us. Part moves part. That's why we're organic. Part moves part. But we've only got a limited number of parts. No matter how many billions of cells they say we've got, part moves part, and they're limited. Who's the first that's going to ask me the obvious question? Part moves part. What moves the first part? Exactly. What moves the first part? There must be something other than us that moves us eventually. It's obvious. There's. If you deny that, you're in absurdity. We'll see there's only one thing can ultimately move it: God. We'll prove that. We'll prove it. You can't.
I only use my intellect as a result of being moved by God.
God will move the intellect. No, but the will is free. You can go whichever way you like. You can even tell him to go to hell. He's moving you, but you can tell him to go to hell.
Correct, but I'm going from here to that chair.
Yep. Ultimately, the will is moved. Luis Molina, a Spanish Jesuit, had great difficulty with this. He said, therefore, the will is not free. But he missed out on understanding. He didn't understand this principle of locomotion. Neither did David Hume. In the history of philosophy, David Hume was probably the silliest, and Karl Marx. This is how we explain it. If I'm tied behind the wheel of a car, I'm lashed to that wheel. I can't move. Can't get away from it. The car's going. It's giving me the locomotion. But I can steer which way it goes. The will is free. It's not dominated by any object whatsoever. And no angelic being can touch the human intellect or the will. They can't touch it. They can touch the images of the imagination, which can lead us this way or that way, but they can't force those things. We're free. We show that in other places. We come to that later in our course. But you remember, nothing can give itself what it hasn't got. In order to give itself, see, take the two billiard balls. Use the example used by David Hume. 1, 2. Now the billiard player with his cue hits billiard ball number 1, which hits billiard ball number 2. And David Hume said, we can have no knowledge of a necessary connection between this movement and that movement. Did you ever hear that argument? You must have. This gentleman has a degree in philosophy. The David Hume, that's been brought up, therefore you cannot prove the existence of God. We have no knowledge of necessary connection. What did David... I've got one page, by the way, which with the very text drawn out of David Hume's books. We had to study them backwards. Locke, Berkeley, Hume, the three English empiricists. and no doubt you've had to study them too. And David Hume, you ask, what did he mean? Remember what a man is saying, you've got to understand what he means. What he means by no knowledge, he means no image. You don't discover these things with images, you discover them with reason, with intellect, with concepts. And we'll see that in detail when we come to the theory of knowledge. David Hume was a clod with regard to the theory of knowledge. I mean, when you've studied the works of these men, John Locke, the great English philosopher, common sense philosopher, some of its times you just say, how could a man, a physician, how could he write such things? Austin Keene is a professor of mathematics in Australia. He may be dead now, for all I know. I don't know. Haven't seen him for years. Austin and I, one Sunday afternoon, the whole afternoon argued this. He couldn't see anything in the principle of contradiction. It didn't make sense to him. He said that something can be and not be at the same time. Try and talk. You know, Woodbury had a wonderful idea, and I discovered this for myself too. Try and tell that to a farmer. Try and tell that to a farmer, or a working man that drives a car, or any man that swings a hammer, or any man that lives with his 2 feet on the ground. Try and tell that silly stuff to them. I'm sorry, you had a question, Miss.
Yes, who is the first mover? Who's moving the guy, the pool player, the billiard player? I'm trying to go back to what we were talking about.
Oh, David Hume doesn't go into that. He just says...
What would you say?
Oh, well, ultimately, he's moving it. But
okay,
ultimately...
But he's not moved. Whatever undergoes movement is moved by another.
Yes. Well, the first ball is moved by him.
Who moves him?
Well, his locomotive power moves this. You trace it right back up to the will. We'll see that when we come to study this.
But you would say God is
the ultimate mover of all movement.
How does that apply here?
Well, he's moving the human will. And this man shoots the thing along.
God's moving the will?
No, yes, God moves the will, yes. Louis Molina...
But the will is free.
Exactly. That's what tricks a lot of people. They can't see that God can move it and it can be free at the same time. He doesn't give it the direction, we do. You see? And we can develop habits, special habits, which will cause the movement to go in one direction or maybe another. You see, now, my intellect straight away would question, how does that man say? What's he talking about? But you look, you've got to know his philosophy very well in order to see what he's saying is that my image, I don't have an image of this. I don't have an image of Jenna is near me. This young lady is far from me. What's your name again?
Heather.
Heather, that's right, I couldn't think of it. Let's say Jenna's near me, Heather's far from me. I don't have an image of that. That's an intelligible concept. All the image I've got is of Jenna. All the image I've got here is Heather. But the intellect judges nearness and farness. That's a judgment of the intellect. You see? That's where Hume went wrong. He would not recognize anything special to the intellect. It's all images. All reduced to images. All our knowledge is images. You remember that? All reduced, different ways he expressed it, and some are more general images than others, all sorts of things. They had no knowledge of philosophy. All the philosophy that went before them. They're groping like amateurs. And Aristotle beautifully brought this stuff out. So did Plato and Socrates. And Exagoras saw that the human intellect cannot be a material thing. He lived 26 centuries ago. He only left about a page and a half of writing, that's all, just a few scattered things. And Aristotle mentions him. One of his statements, what appears inwardly hinders and obstructs the extraneous. In other words, if we had, say, blueness, St. Thomas uses this example, in a vase, the water inside would appear blue to us, even though it's not blue. Because what appears inwardly hinders and obstructs what comes from outside, namely my vision. But we have to admit by the logic of the whole thing, that there's a limited number of things. You can't have an infinite series of things actually existing. That's absurd. The word infinite means unfinished. Without end. Finis, end. Without end. That's what that means, infinite, without end. But if you have a finite series of things, or no, actually infinite things, actually means it's limited, it's finite. But infinite means it's not finite. So it's absurd. There's a limited number of organs we have, what we say, limited number of organs, limited number of operators within us. Therefore, we have to be moved by something other than ourselves. Even the greatest thing that God ever made, what's it called? What was the brightest star in the
Lucifer.
Lucifer, the bearer of light. That's what his name was. The great Lucifer. Even he, when he revolted, had to be given the movement. The movement was given by him to the will of Lucifer. It's extraordinary, but it all boils down. The first way of proving the existence of God shows nothing can move itself. We deal with that with some detail. I do it in about 6 pages. You'll get that. So, but we're still free. And Luis Molina, the Spanish Jesuit, 16th century, I think, something like that. I've forgotten now the year about that time. He says he could not see that the will could be free. Well, he can't see the necessity. There's necessity on one side. You've got 2 terms to the problem. God moves the will is free. Both are forced on us. I'm presenting this very concept to the Academy of Science next week. That never deny one term of a problem to save the other. That's very, very bad science of any kind. Don't say, oh, well, the will can't be free because it's good to save this, God, that we really would never want to go against this, that God moves the will. Or don't say God doesn't move the will in order to save the freedom of the will. But that's what most men have done. Denied one term to save the other. It's a very bad, bad method. I was asked about that with certain sexual matters with regard to a book published some years ago. And my article in there, that's one of the things they praised in the article, is that concept of it's bad science to deny one term to save another. So that's why things are... Oh, I'm sorry, you had a question, yes.
Dr. Waters, it seems odd to me that this point comes here in this outline. That you have given us 3 signs of imminent activity.
Yes.
Right? Irritability,
Yep.
internal finality, nutrition. But following that is this movement.
Well,
And the necessity, and this principle of movement, whatever undergoes movement is moved by another, because it seems excluding, even the piece of gold there is still a creature, and it doesn't have internal movement, but it still is moved by another.
no, it doesn't move at all unless it's moved by something.
Unless it's moved by something else.
Well, you see, I threw this in just because it was there, because it's not convenient to put it anywhere else, to be honest with you. Namely, the question comes up, since we're talking about internal finality and all those things, why do living things, are they organized? Why are they organic? Because of that internal finality, it's moving itself. So all parts move parts, etc. And you might say, the way I've always put it before students is something like this. That, say, this moves that moves that moves that moves that. Oh, wait, I should go this way, perhaps. This way. And then finally here. In other words, part moves part. It's a clumsy way I've done it there. Part moves part. But you see, we're talking about movement here. Now we're going to switch on to something a little higher, or something about actually the principle of vital operation, that's right. Then the other things, the vegetative operations. So it's convenient to put it there. It's not convenient to put it anywhere else. Why is it necessarily organic? And then, what is death? I've mentioned that. We'll have reason to mention that again next class, in a different context. Sometimes the planning of these things is not easy. Anyway, be that as it may, we've got it in there. So a plant is organized, and highly organized. If you study, for instance, the growing stem of a plant, It's amazing how organized that can be. And if you study the production of seeds in a plant, it's amazing how it can be amongst the various orders of plants. But remember, when a philosopher uses a term, be careful, it's not the same way that other sciences use the term. They don't always use it the same way. That's why I mentioned that word organ, for that reason. However, whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. We have to satisfy that principle with what we've been teaching, namely the operation of living as distinct from non-living. So whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. We have to explain that. Well, how does that apply here? Organs solve the problem inasmuch as part moves part. So things have to be divided into organs. The whole organism moves itself according to imperfect self-movement. But all movement, going from potency to act. Now the newcomers might find that a little strange. Potency means can move, goes to act, does move. And nothing can actualize itself, its own potency, because it has to have the act in order to move itself to get the act. So a thing can't actualize itself. A thing, water goes, let's say from, I'll give an illustration of potency and act here. You might remember this from last class. Water, for instance, goes from potency to act. Potency is can be hot. Act is does be hot. And remember, can be hot doesn't mean it's a little bit hot, it means it's not be hot at all. Now it can't move itself from can be hot to does be hot. Can move to does move because it means it would have the hotness before it gave it to itself. That's absurd. That's why things cannot move themselves. They cannot give themselves what they haven't got. So in order for the water to move itself from can be hot to does be hot, it'd have to be hot here and not hot at the same time. That's absurd. All the principles of reason, if you deny them, you're led into absurdity. So, can move, the same thing, to does move. Can move if it doesn't move. So to give itself the movement, it'd have to have it and not have it at the same time. That's contradiction. That leads you into utter absurdity. All principles are reduced ultimately to the one principle. Nothing can be and not be at the same time under the same respect. That's the supreme principle of all reason. Nothing can give itself movement and not have it at the same time. Because if it's giving it to itself, it had it to give it to itself. But yet we said it wasn't moving. Can you follow that now with respect?
Isn't it in the nature of things?
What's that mean?
It's in the nature of a horse. A horse has the potency to gallop. He's not currently galloping.
Yep.
But it's his own autonomous decision to act.
Yeah, but part moves part. That's the whole point. Part moves part within the horse. But what ultimately...
So that would be true of human being by coming up to and sitting on that chair.
It applies to a human being, yes. The horse, he's got instinctive activity.
Right, but who moves me? Who's moving me to go?
You're moving yourself according to imperfect self-movement, imperfect autonomy, if you like. Not perfect autonomy, because you can't give yourself the movement, the ultimate movement. You see, something gives you the movement. It might be Gabriel. He might be moved by Michael. Michael might be moved by Raphael. Or it may be then ultimately God has to give the movement. There's ultimately must be one self-movement. One which doesn't have movement, isn't got potency, but is pure actuality. That is the supreme name of God. Pure actuality, pure act. By sheer logic, by sheer metaphysics, you're forced into that. It's not a convenient thing like that scientist said to me, oh, Thomistic philosophy is a philosophy invented by the church to protect Catholic teaching. That's BS of the worst kind, my friends. Aristotle wasn't a Catholic. And Aristotle was the first great philosopher. And during the 13th century, Aristotle was banned, and even by the church. Albert the Great stood his ground, and his pupil, Thomas Aquinas, did too. Stood their ground and said, Aristotle is right. They stuck to their guns. They were misled, and we'll see that presently. We come to the theory of knowledge. We'll see just exactly what happened. This will come when we get further into this. You'll see it. Can't see that clock too well. They misunderstood Aristotle. The Arabs did. The Arabs were probably the greatest psychologists of the internal senses in the history of the world. Avicenna and Averroes. Avicenna was Ibn Sina. I can't remember. Averroes has got a similar name. Those Arabs, they saw that what Aristotle said. They saw what Aristotle said. They were teaching him. And so they misunderstood something on the human intellect. And we'll see that in detail later with the human mind. We're examining that. They saw what Aristotle said, but they misunderstood one word. One word led them astray. Result was St. Thomas had them stuff retranslated, and from Greek directly to Latin, whereas before it went from Greek, Arabic, Latin. And I've got a retranslation, for instance, of Avicenna's work, and I think it's as rare as hen's teeth. I've got the whole thing. He's at Metaphysics in French. And what they did is they saw the errors of the Arabs, and they saw that Aristotle, sorry I'm getting stuck for words, Aristotle was right. And he could guide them all. And Anaxagoras, those men were right. And they saw this, the ancient Greeks, the medievals saw that. And they banned Aristotle. But Thomas and Albert the Great was known even as the Great during his own lifetime. He was a vast intellect with a tremendous amount of courage and a tremendous amount of wisdom. I stood next to his coffin where he's in the Church of St. Albert the Great in Cologne. I stood next to it and I felt I was that big. I thought, here's a giant of a man, a giant intellect. I felt puny. I'm sorry, you had a question.
No, just more of a comment that what Helen was talking about as far as the movement is something that, a point that Dr. Bonnet made a number of times about the first mover, that we can't think of this as going back in time.
Not in time, no. Oh, no.
The movement is being given right now.
Right now. Yeah. And therefore, the result is, God is now. You see? God is now. For newcomers, I hasten to reply, don't forget, we're not arguing from theological sources, we're arguing from reason. We're arguing the same way that all the great philosophers have argued. We miss the word God, we'll make more precise that meaning of that word later, etc. I think, but the point about this is, you see, there's a principle of reason that would disturb us and say things move themselves. How can they? When this principle says it's necessary that something move anything that moves. That's the way we explain it. The only way you can explain it. And it explains why we have organs. Part is necessary to move part. And each part has a specific function. Whether you wiggle your ears, whether you use your arms, or walk with your legs, the locomotive power forces it to do that. But the locomotive power is moved by the muscles. Moves the muscles, rather, and through the medium of the nerves. But the locomotive power is moved by the sensitive appetite, in other words, the passions. And the passions are moved by the imagination. And the imagination is moved by the will. And the will and the intellect move each other in different ways, different orders of causation. They can't give themselves the movement. So there is a first mover. And that was what one of the problems was in the early days. And even recently, I've heard men argue, how can we say the first mover is God? They say it's easy to prove a first mover exists. The old pagan Aristotle, 4 centuries BC, he saw that. And so did many philosophers. But to say it's God needs an extra step or so. An extra step or two. But the first mover, they all recognize that. We've run out of time. I believe that clock's a little slow. Yes, remember, there's no class next week. Please.